Hello. On behalf of the IFP School Voices team, welcome to our 9th webinar tonight. Just a few words about our organization. This webinar will be hosted by two alumni for the first time, and the presentation will be divided into two parts. Each one will be followed by a Q&A session moderated by Rita Louali. Rita is a student in the Energy and Processes program. She will be helped by Denis Bossan, Associate Professor at the school. As usual, please use the Q&A module to submit your questions in order to be addressed to our guest. My colleague Meling will be pleased to interact with you on the chat. And it is now time to start with our Dean, Christine Travers. So please, Christine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sabine. So, dear alumni, students and colleagues, welcome to everyone and thank you for joining us for this 9th IFP School Voices webinar. Webinars dedicated in priority to IFP school graduates, students, staff and colleagues from IFP EN and subsidiaries. This webinar is the ultimate one before the summer holidays. Since December, many subjects related mainly to the ecological transition have been addressed in our four main sectors: georesources and energy, processes for energy and chemistry, energy economics and management, and motorization and sustainable mobility. They were all a great success, thanks to you, dear graduates, who are the best ambassadors of the school, and they have undoubtedly contributed to strengthening our network. So, it's a great pleasure for me, especially because they were my students, to open today this 9th webinar, welcoming, for once it is not usual, two speakers, Rafael Moreno and Ignacio Adame, respectively RIG 2000 and ENEP 2014 classes, working both at the Boston Consulting Group. Rafael is a downstream refining and petrochemical expert partner and associate director in the Madrid office. He is a member of the energy practice and part of the weather expert team in downstream and petrochemical. Since he joined BCG, Rafael has been working for IOC and NOC in America, Asia, and Europe in projects of operational excellence, value chain optimization, and transformation. Prior to joining the firm, Rafael worked for CEPSA for more than 15 years in refineries, mainly in operation. He graduated in industrial engineering from the Seville Industrial School of Engineers. He has earned in 2000 a Master of Science in Petroleum Engineering and Gas from IFP School, as well as a management development program with honors at IA Business School in Madrid. Ignacio is a project leader based in BCG's Doha office. He joined BCG in 2017 as an associate in the energy practice and developed a deep expertise within the refining and petrochemicals operation. He has nearly 10 years experience in the oil and gas industry worldwide and is a core member of both the operations and energy practice areas. Prior to joining BCG, Ignacio gained nearly 5 years of experience with CEPSA in refining operations optimization in Spain and with Air Liquide in operations and commissioning in the Middle East. Ignacio holds a double engineering degree in energy from École Centrale Supélec in Paris and Comillas Pontifical University in Madrid. Additionally, he holds a master's degree from IFP School. Today, their conference is entitled COVID-19 Crisis, Broke or Accelerator of the Energy Transition for Oil and Gas. Just before leaving the floor to our speakers, we have another innovation today, as Sabine said. A student of the current ENEP class, Rita Wali, will ask a question to the speakers. Thank you, Rita. So, Rafael, Ignacio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Christine. And thank you very much for the opportunity of being today here, because I think the topic of today is obviously affecting to all of us, as the COVID is affecting the whole world, but particularly for us working in the energy sector. This is particularly interesting to see how it is impacting the oil and gas market and the oil and gas companies as well. So again, very happy to be here. And so let's, as Sabine said, so the presentation will be split into two parts. The first part will be focusing on the market, so how the COVID has impacted the market and the forecast for the future. And the second part will be focusing on the oil and gas, how the oil and gas companies are dealing with this COVID impact, and what are the plans for the future and how they change. And it will answer the question of this top of this presentation, which is, has COVID been a brake or an accelerator of the energy transition for oil and gas companies? So let's start with the first part. Let's talk about the how COVID impacted the oil demand. So if we look at the past, so before the COVID, so we see that the oil demand was actually growing at a good pace, so 1.4% on average every year. Obviously, the growth was not the same for each product, right? So we have, for example, jet growing at 3.5%, so growing at more speed, and the fuel oil growing, actually decreasing, so not growing but decreasing, because it's being replaced by gas, right, in the power generation. So the picture looks really good in terms of let's say for oil and gas companies, I mean, on how the demand was growing, and even the future before COVID was looking good, although at least less good, right? Because it was growing at a lower speed. So there were let's say the forecast, they will agree that oil demand will grow at a 0.6% on an annual basis, which is half of the growth that they were having before 2020, but still growing, right? And the thing is that every forecast, and we have just a few here, will agree that it will grow, right? So some of them will say it will grow less, some of them will say it will grow more, right? And without any peak announced in the next 10 years, so until before 2030, right? Obviously, the only scenario that was, let's say, forecasting a drop in the demand was the EEI with the sustainable scenario, but we know those are not realistic scenarios, let's say. Those are in case most of the countries will develop policies to attain a sustainable scenario, right? But most of the forecasts will agree that it will still grow. Now, if we look at this same picture after COVID, then we start looking at much different picture here. So I would say two things, right? So the first one is that the forecasts are not or the consensus on the forecast is there is no consensus, let's say, or there's less consensus on what is going to be the forecast for the next years. So we can see that the demand is behaving very differently from forecast to forecast. So we still have the optimistic forecast, such as the OPEC or the EIA, which is the Energy Information Administration, which is an energy agency for the US government. So they will still see an optimistic scenario where the demand will still grow. But most of the scenarios for oil and gas companies will see a peak on the demand before 2030. So there's a big difference, right? Because we didn't see that peak pre-COVID. So there's definitely something in between that happened, right? And that's COVID. So what we are going to look now is we're going to focus on what are the main drivers of this change. So if we look at how the forecasts are built, so taking into account each of the products, so each of the products will have a different driver for the demand. So let's say, for example, diesel and gasoline, they will be driven by how many vehicles are, so the size of the vehicle fleet, and the miles that are driven by those vehicles. So that will drive the demand. But obviously, you have some efficiency effect that has to be discounted, and you have the transition to alternative ways of, in this case, of mobility, right? So we have here the electric vehicles, right, which is the most clear case. So we have the same for each of the products, right? So we have, so for jet will be the flight number and the travel distance. For power or for fuel oil will be the power generation. So the fuel oil which is used to produce power, and for the bunker fuel oil and marine gas oil, that would be the shipping activity, right? So what we highlighted here are, and we'll go more into the detail just in a minute. It's let's say the drivers that had impacted due to the COVID. Say we have some negative, let's say, impact in terms of the demand. Say the COVID impacted negatively on the demand because we're consuming less of those products because of these drivers. And on the other hand, we have an acceleration or a positive impact on some of the transition elements. So if we go to the demand drivers, so we saw previously there are four. Let's start with this with the vehicles. Say we didn't do let's say a holistic study or exhaustive study, but we just brought a few ideas or instances where we see the policies have changed or behaviors of the people have changed driven by COVID. Say so for example, we see that in the past year, so the European Union, they set a set of emission targets for the fleet. Say let's say for example, right now the new cars in the European Union cannot emit more than 25 grams of CO2 per kilometer, and this target will be lower in 2025 or 2030, right? So those are, let's say, policies that the European Union are implementing recently. And then we have a couple of examples, because most of the examples of banning the sales of diesel or gasoline cars are mostly in Europe. So we have the case of France, so recently Spain, the Nordics countries as well, the UK recently as well. But we have it's not just European, right? So we have some other countries. So here we have an example of California saying that from 2035 they will stop selling the gasoline fueled vehicles. Or we have another instance of what we see in China. They will start to phase out the diesel and gasoline sales of vehicles. So this is in terms of the policies, but as well, there's another driver on the demand impacted negatively, and is on the behaviors of the consumers. So here what we see is, for example, just a few numbers to support this. That some of the like American land travel so will remain lower than the pre-COVID levels. So this is a structural change due to the COVID, right? Because people is traveling less. Say as well an impact on people traveling on the public transport because they're scared of getting the COVID. So they that's a survey that would say that 20% of the people that usually use this public transportation, they will not use it anymore. And one of the most important changes as well is on the ways of working. So due to and probably most of you are impacted by this because most of the people are starting to work on a hybrid model. Say what we saw is that a 4.5 increase in terms of the hybrid of the employees working on a hybrid model. So let's say working, it doesn't mean fully remote, but they will start on a hybrid model from the office and remotely. So obviously this will impact because those employees will not take their cars to go to the office. So that in terms of the aviation, say there's again some policies that have been implemented recently that are affecting the number of flights. So probably the most and for those who live in France, you know that very well. Say the French government banned the short-haul internal flights when there is an alternative on rail transportation. Say for shorter than 2.5 hours. And this is picking up. I mean, so today Germany and Spain are already the governments are already on discussions to implement the same. So I mean, there could be more countries joining this same policy. And then we have in terms of the emissions of the aircrafts. Say in the US, they have implemented a policy that will restrict the emissions that the new aircrafts will be emitting from 2028. So that means this is similar to, let's say, the emissions of a vehicle, let's say, but applied to an aircraft. And then we have some instances where even if there's no policy, but some companies that are on their own choosing to substitute their flights by train journeys when there is an alternative as well. So even if there is no policy behind. And then in terms of the behaviors, say has been a huge impact on the aviation industry. Say we have in a survey that 23% of the travelers will hold off their travels until the next year. So they will mean that they will not fly on this year until next year. So, and probably some of them will not fly. So this is a structural change again. And what is predicted is that in 2024, the the traffic of passengers will reach the pre-COVID levels. So it will take at least 3 more years to reach to that level.
And Nacho, jumping here, as in a collaborative style that we always have, if we look back to the strategies that the major players were doing in 2019, if you have a product that was the key no-brainer, it was Jet. So Jet was growing 3.5 CAGR. It was a no-brainer, tourist, China development, etc. And then we see that to come back to the level of 2019 is going to go nearly 5 years. So that is really, really impacting and changing the strategy. And last year, the Kero was below the price of Reprem for a long time. Go ahead, please. Sorry to jump in, but it was just an anecdote.
No worries. Sorry. And then in terms of the power generation on seaboard, so here we will see a lesser impact. But what we can see is that in the future, so obviously the fuel oil will still decrease. So that was the trend before COVID. Now it's even more so deeper, the decline on the use of fuel oil as power for power generation. But what is interesting is that when we see the power growth, the total power growth of in the total mix of power, we expect 3.2, and the natural gas is growing at 2.7, meaning that it will actually lose their share in the energy mix. So it's growing less than the total market. So it will lose their share, its share, into the energy mix. So obviously driven by renewables, which are the big winner here. And just a few instances as well on the shipping. So there's so Europe, they have the European Union have a target to reduce the carbon intensity by 40% when the ships are operating. And then in terms of let's say financial markets, so there's which is the Poseidon Principle, which is an initiative driven by some banks financing the maritime industry. So they will see the fallout, the decline of the classic fuel oil by 2026, so very, very soon. And then we have some examples of where the European Union is promoting the introduction of alternative fuels. So that will tie with the next part. So that we saw the demand. Now we're going to see the impact on the transition. So what are the things that are accelerating those alternatives that we saw on the previous framework? So when we go to the alternative fuels for vehicles, so here we have policies where they have targets, clear targets, to reach a number of zero emission vehicles. And that's in the European Union, they target 30 million by 2030. Then they have some other, let's say, very strict policy to reach the 100% zero emission passenger car sales by 2040. That's in the US as well. And California, we saw in the previous as a policy, so they will target to have a 5 million electric vehicles by 2030. So, and in terms of the technology or how this has been changed, so if we look at the sales of the past year, so in a decreasing market, because there was a drop of 16% of car sales in the global market. So the sales of the electric vehicles, they increased by 41%. So in a decreasing market, they almost increased by 40%. And then there is a key driver that will allow to have a higher penetration, which is the decrease on the cost of the lithium batteries. So the expectation is that the decrease will be around 40%. And this will help to achieve a penetration of the electric vehicle in the total fleet in the world of 7 to 12%, which still remain small, right? Because we're talking about 10% of the total cars in the world. But we need to take into account, obviously, a car needs some time to the fleet renews every 5 to 10 years. So it's something that takes time to renew. So then, very quickly on the policies for biofuels and jet. So there's some of the policies that are pushed by either the European Union, Japan, and even the US. So this is, let's say, globally, they're trying to push to get more biofuel on the aviation industry. And when we look at the estimations for the future, we see that the share of the biofuel in the total consumption of jet and kerosene is 10% by 2030 and reaching almost 20% for the 2040. And then in terms of the impact on renewable and gas replacement, so we saw that already the fuel was decreasing, and obviously there's a big push here in power to drive this transition, right? So as part of the, for example, the European Green Deal, so there are targets, very ambitious targets, to have a 32% or up to 59% or 60% in 2050 of the renewable energy. It doesn't mean power, but energy. So out of this, actually, if we look at the power number, will be 80%. So 80% of the power will be generated by renewables in 2050. And Japan is let's say betting on the LNG. So that's their to switch from the oil to LNG and to use this LNG as well to produce hydrogen and enable other technologies. And here, let's say the main driver for this is obviously the drop on cost, which is as you can see almost half. The cost will halve in 10 years from now, so by 2030. So this will obviously help to have more renewables replacing the classic fuel power generation. And then very quickly to that, and let's go to the questions after that. So the impact on the shipping industry. So here the impact is on the gas replacement. So there's a number of initiatives here to start using LNG as fuel for the ships instead of having fuel oil. And actually, when we look at the current numbers, we see that around 13% of the vessels that are being sold today or ordered today are LNG fueled. So this is a trend that already started and will start or will continue to increase. And there's even some research that says that the bio LNG it's possible. So making even the LNG a neutral alternative to feed the ships.
So we're having a first question for this first part of the presentation by an anonymous attendee who's saying, regarding the impact of the global sustainability and the greenhouse gas emission reduction, do you believe that these can lead to an increase in the commodity prices in the sense that the reduction of the expenditures would lead to a rarefication of the supply?
Perfect. Nacho, do you want to take it?
you can go if you want, or I can go.
Yes, that is one of my favorites. I mean, predicting the price of commodities is out of the scope, I think, of anybody. It's quite complex. We can talk about rationals and dynamics. On the pure short term, we see that there has been a strong cut of investment in upstream commodities, thinking about oil, since 2015 when there was a crisis. The COVID has exacerbated this cut. The return of investment in the investment in upstream has been very poor since close to 6 years ago. That has led to, if now there is an explosion in consumption in the short term, that could lead to a high price, depending on the discipline of the OPEC. But we don't have to forget that there is a lot of oil and gas underground, very cheap in Saudi Arabia and other countries that can float. So it's somehow dynamic. And also on the long term, what is clear is that there is a lot of reserve at low price, that they have the risk to have a value close to zero if we think in 25 years or 25 years. So there is a trade-off. How do you monetize your oil reserves and this return of investment in the upstream? So I think there should be waves up and forth, but in the long term, there should be a price decrease. Related to the refining prices, there is a rationalization, and then only the more complex, higher conversion, more competitive refining will survive, and that leads to a lower cost of refining, but that is negligible in the overall commodity price. Any other question?
So, yeah, second question is that we have Benoit Hade wondering what's BCG's take on the future mix between hydrogen and electricity for transportation.
I can answer that. Say, let's say the race, in that race, electricity is already winning, right? So they are much more mature than the let's say the hydrogen technology, and even though if you think about let's say conceptually what it is, let's say a vehicle which is fueled by hydrogen, you're actually probably converting electricity to hydrogen, then hydrogen to electricity to move the motor, right? So in terms of how efficient is that, conceptually, let's say, so electricity is winning. So for me, let's say there will be some penetration of the hydrogen, but the biggest share of the growth and of the market will be driven by electricity.
And last but not least, question raised by Ebio Vitor. Have you seen also a transition in the types of projects that you have been working on in this post-pandemic recovery? Example, switching from oil and gas to hydrogen and renewables, etc.
Yes, clearly yes. We have done many projects on decarbonization. We have done many projects on waste. We have done many projects on hydrogen. That has been, I mean, it was already, but now it's somehow is massive. I would say that it has grown from being 10% to something close to 30–40% of our workers, oil and gas consulting.
And I will add, so me being in the Middle East, so that would be the last or the least place where you think you could find this kind of projects. But we're seeing that clients, they want to start driving this transition. So it's happening everywhere, not just in Europe.
If we have more time, we have two new questions. One from Ricardo Fuentes, who's saying, how is the scenario for oil and gas companies to implement sustainable energy projects in their portfolios?
I think that we are going to answer in the second part of the presentation. If it's not the case, let's remind us at the end.
Definitely. And another question from Eddie Idiong, thanking you for the presentation and saying, for resource-rich developing countries, what's the trade-off for the alternatives on the need for fossil fuels?
From the resource, do we mean by the countries like Saudi Arabia, Russia?
Yeah, I think that's what he meant.
Yes, there is a complex trade-off there. It's a complex strategy. How do I monetize my reserve? And there is a lot of strategies on how do I monetize my reserve. And you have seen movement, for example, this share taken from oil and gas, from national oil companies in refineries in the consumer countries in order to ensure that they are going to monetize their crude oil. There is this very interesting movement on the crude to olefins or crude to chemicals that from a pure business sense is difficult to understand, except if you put the price of the crude oil very, very cheap, and that you ensure that you are transforming directly, something that maybe in the future doesn't have the real price that has today. So there is a strong and deep, very deep thinking about how do I monetize my reserve and how do I make it without losing the energy transition. These countries, they want to be perceived as clean, and they are making huge effort. As Nacho was saying, we have this conversation in the Middle East, and especially he has this conversation. Before going to this presentation, let me share a little bit. As I'm becoming old, I'm still not a grandfather, far away from this, and I hope not to be a grandfather in the next 10 years. That my teenager has 16, but still I can tell some anecdotes about the EFP and how. I mean, that is very special for me to do the presentation here with you because I have been there. And my two brothers has been there. Just the anecdote is, it was 2004. We were in Cepsa Rábida. We were starting a hydrosulfurization, FCC naphtha hydrosulfurization unit, and we were preparing the meeting. I was the production responsible for the area, and I have the process engineer. The process engineer was Maria Olavarria. She also studied in the EFP, and we were preparing the meeting with the expert guys that were coming to do the inspection, validation, and then the startup team. And then it was accent license, or Prime G. And then we saw arriving Nelly Erhard and Matteo Casimiri. So Nelly Erhard was sitting close to me, and we have been out many times when we were studying. She was the responsible startup. I was the responsible on the other side to the startup. So it was okay. We are going to do it well. And then on the other side, the responsible for the inspection and validation was Matteo Casimiri, that has been studied with Maria. So at the end, the EFP is transversal. I have found many BCG and many EFP guys worldwide in many refineries. I have been in more than 30 refineries in the world. It's often the case that you find EFP people in the production, in the companies, in the headquarters. So it's like a big family. Let's go then to the core topic. Nacho has presented the impact, the transition, the forecast, how the forecast has been, but we still haven't answered the key question: accelerator or brake? And then we are going to try to land these ideas to the oil and gas companies, and that is the second part of the presentation. Can you go to the next one, Nacho, please? This transition is not new. We saw this 1.4% CAGR growth per year. That can be perceived as a positive growth, but the reality is that is not something amazing. We already saw the decline. We already have been talking in the past about the peak oil by 2030, 2025, 2035. Then most of the big players were moving in this direction before the COVID. We saw, let's say, we suffered, the downstream guys, we suffered this divestment in refineries. We saw ExxonMobil sells Sicilia Augusta, Shell sell Martinez. We have seen the closures of the Lamed refinery, many others. So there has been a movement, okay, get out of this market that is somehow very mature and somehow declining. And let's focus, first it was focus in upstream, and then focus in other areas where the growth is. Shift to petchem, another big trend. We have seen the acquisition of Borealis by OMV, the Austrian player. We have seen this movement to the, okay, let's valorize the ethane and LPG from the shale oil, especially where it is, Qatar, as Nacho knows, but also ExxonMobil in Texas. They have announced a huge CapEx investments. So I get rid of the carbonization. I produce products, I produce physical plastic, and then that is a way. Then, and that becomes a little bit old-fashioned now, after what Nacho has said, movement from oil to gas. We saw this huge acquisition of British Gas by Shell. The cost was $70 billion, I think $60 to $70 billion, if I'm not wrong. And today, the value of the global shell is 130. So they pay something that was around 50% of the actual value for this gas company. So move from oil to gas, strategic movement. And then in a more shy way, we think about the shift to power. So Total is for me an example of this movement to the renewable, to the power. And that was before the COVID. Let's see what happened after. If we go to the next one, please. After we have seen huge pressure, it's not the COVID. The COVID is the COVID, but then we have the society and the shareholders. We are not going to talk for 1 hour covering in an exhaustive way. Then we decided, for me, it was a very special day, the 27th of May. And it was internal WhatsApp group talking, that is crazy, that is changing. Same day, we have Exxon and Chevron suffering the shareholder rebellions against their resistance to include the climate change in their strategy. So two board members of an activist hedge fund are now in the Exxon board. The activist shareholder are pushing to change the strategy of Chevron in order to cut the carbon emission. More impacting for me has been a legal requirement to Shell in order to cut their carbon emission by 45% in 2030. But that is, if the society asks Shell to buy fuels, they will refuse because the scope 3 is included here. So others will supply the demand because the legal core is banning Shell to cover this demand. That is very shocking. And the third one is more anecdotal. Another refinery sold, okay, to a non-major player, to a small player. What is impacting here is the price. Even if the refinery is very simple, $75 million. With that, you cannot build an hydrosulfurization of naphtha mid-size and no more. We're not talking about HDS of diesel, not even of course, not hydrocracker. So 75 million is ridiculously low. So that is the reality today. Just as an example, how the society has moved. Let's go to what the oil and gas companies are doing. We see here the droplet, the green droplet show announcement done since the COVID started. And we see many of these green droplets. Most of them, they are attacking something in the short term, something that today's CEOs has to make decision on. It's not anymore the 2035, 2040 future that, okay, the others guy will do when I be retired. No, that is your job today. So we see commitment on 2025. That is a big difference. We don't see something very interesting. We don't see major commitment in developed oil and gas production. If you had a look to any strategy of any company 15 years ago, 10 years ago, I will double my upstream reserve. I will increase my production. That is not anymore the case. We are talking about Western Europe in this slide. We will talk about the world, but it's a general trend. And when you develop the production, the upstream production, it is mostly driven by gas, as an example of Total. We go to the next one, please. We see that is not it's not only these crazy old-fashioned European guys that they think they are very modern. That is a global trend with what we call international oil companies, EOCs. We haven't seen Aramco in this slide or ADNOC, but I think it would be close. This kind of announcement will arrive. But we see Petronas, we see Ecopetrol Colombia, we see PetroChina, we see Lukoil. Okay, shy commitment, long-term, net zero 2050, but still movement. We see some shy commitment of ExxonMobil and Chevron, but I bet that in the short term we will see making announcement due to the pressure of the society. Okay, that is the general presentation. Let's go to something tangible in order to answer the question. Let's go to the next one, and that I think is the summary of this presentation that was prepared by Nacho, and we were debriefing a lot about it. Look, 2019 to 2021, the total capex of this portfolio of companies is reducing by 21%. Normal, it is a crisis, but reducing 21%, the low carbon capex, thinking renewable, thinking green, thinking bio, power, etc., has been multiplied by more than 2. So the total capex has grown from 3.5% of these low carbon capex to 10% today. So it's close to triple. And that is the answer. Yes, there has been a clear acceleration. That is not normal. That opens a big question that we will raise later about, okay, 10% of your CapEx in, let's call it new business, is it enough to jump from a classical oil and gas company to a new economy energy player? And that is not so clear. We see some differences. We see guys with 26% Repsol, Total very, very strong and sustained it over the time, 17. And then we see other much more shy, the Americans guys are still 3%. So this is a key answer for me. Yes, there has been a clear acceleration in these 2 years. And if we go to the next one, some other flavors, other ideas, we see investment in developing technology by oil and gas companies. For example, Aramco investing in hydrogen. The question of hydrogen was very interesting. I fully align with the answer provided by Nacho. Today, the hydrogen pressure, I think, is more on the hydrogen. For a ton of hydrogen producing a steam reformer by methane, we are sending to atmosphere typically something around 9 to 10 tons of CO2. Then there is a huge pressure in the downstream industry in order to reduce that. 2 days ago, it was started the biggest electrolyzer to produce hydrogen that was in Germany, participated by Shell. Aramco is developing plants blue hydrogen. O&G has developing plastic recycling by pyrolysis, announced it. CO2 carbon development by Chevron. So big players moving in this direction. So going to the final slide, let's summarize a little bit what are the conclusions of what is our perspective. And we are very happy to be challenged and to have open discussion in this forum. For us, the energy transition has been clearly accelerated. The companies are investing more in absolute number and of course in relative number. Who is paying this transition? In BCG, we talk about the cash cow. The cash cow, the milk that is feeding this capex is the traditional business. Still some good refined downstream asset and especially the upstream and petchem. They are funding this journey. However, there is still big concern about the size of this, the size and how successful will that be the traditional oil and gas company to make this transition effective and to be profitable in the future. And that is a big challenge. However, it's very exciting time for engineers, very exciting time for the oil and gas. There is very nice work to be done by you, the people that are attending to this seminar in this area.
So reminding the question raised by Ricardo Fuentes in the first part, who said, how is the scenario for oil and gas companies to implement sustainable energy projects in their portfolios?
The scenario is that they have a lot of pressure in order to implement this sustainable alternative. They have a lot of pressure to transfer the company into a sustainable company to shift from traditional business. In fact, in some of the clients that I'm working with, the return of investment that you are asking to this kind of investment is much lower than a traditional oil and gas. So for a downstream business to be approved today, you have to show something above 20%, 25% return of investment. Tier, we are renewables, they only require 5 to 6%. So it's the hurdle that you are putting is different. One is perceive the future, the other is the past. That's explain why the portfolio is shifting, and we are seeing on average a 10% spending in the new business, and it's increasing year after year. Nacho, feel free to jump in any of these questions, okay?
It's okay. Waiting for other questions.
Gita, any other question?
Yeah, there's another question. I'm not sure to understand the second part, but where did it go? What is the sense of scope 3 and even the sense of scope 2?
Okay. Nacho, do you take it? I take it.
What was it again?
The meaning of the scopes, scope 2
Okay.
and 3.
Perfect.
So there are mainly 3 scopes when we talk about emissions. So scope 1 are the ones that are directly, so let's say I'm an industry. So the ones I'm emitting in the place I do my business, right? So if I'm producing gasoline, I'm a refinery, so the emissions of the furnaces that I have in my refinery. That's scope 1. Scope 2 is, okay, I need, for example, electricity to run my refinery. So this electricity is coming from, let's say, gas. So it means that I'm indirectly emitting some CO2 because I'm consuming this electricity, which is coming from gas. So this is scope 2. And scope 3 is, okay, I'm producing gasoline, okay, which is leaving my refinery, but someone else will use it and will have, and this gasoline will have emissions in a car, right? So this is the scope 3. So let's say the emissions which are happening downstream or by others, by the products that you are producing.
Next question from myself. What's the future of fossil energies if they are still available on the long term? Are the big investors simply going to drop this market? And are we really investing in renewables if we compare the investments to the world GDP growth?
Okay, very interesting.
The first part.
Go ahead, Nacho. Yes, go ahead, Nacho.
Say, I think the driver of the let's say the end of the oil and gas era will not be the availability of resources. The driver of the end of the oil and gas era will be the demand. So people not using any more oil and gas. So any, let's say, of their products, so any gasoline or diesel. So the driver for that will be the demand, will not be the availability. So if we wanted to keep using that, there will be available resources.
And thinking, elaborate a little bit on what Ignacio is saying, the big problem for the industry is that will lead to very big overcapacity. And when there is an overcapacity, the margin is squeezed and there is a competition, the last standing man. And that is what we call a dog industry. So it's a very, very painful period where you don't make margin, you are losing, you are squeezing, you start closing assets. And somehow it's a decadent moment until there is an equilibrium of maybe there is going to be some niche areas, even in the fuels, that could be interesting. I mean, we will need blue boils, we will need some specific areas, and there could be good business. But the general trend is going to be a squeezing industry.
All right, thanks for the answer. Next, a question from Gaik Oganian. Is the transition good for growing energy independence of countries, or there can be some drawbacks in the terms of energy independence? How can countries without fossil fuels leverage the energy transition?
Can you repeat, please, Gita? Not sure to have proper answer.
So he's raising a point about the energy independence of the country. Is the transition good for growing energy independence of the countries? Or there can be some drawbacks in terms of independence?
Definitely, I think Europe is doing that, right? So Europe is the clear case of, you know, why you should be doing this, because you don't have oil and gas, or what you have is already is low and is decreasing. So it's not gonna increase in the future because there are no more reserves, very little. So the incentive for Europe to do this transition is huge, to become independent, right? In terms of so obviously you need to get a mature technology to make it competitive against importing, right? So but this is what we are, I mean, Europe is betting on, right? So on technology, so it becomes mature, so it becomes competitive against importing the classic fuel oil, energy, right?
All right. Next, a question from Laetitia Salesi, who is my supervisor actually in the ENEP program. So thanking you for the presentation and asking, according to you, in which region of the world is the acceleration most significant and sustainable?
Europe. Europe, maybe California, but Europe is where there is a higher pressure, higher changes. The ban of the diesel in cities already announced a long time ago. Europe wants to lead, and that has also to be the trailblazers in this journey. Is not always very satisfactory. We have all this claim about the price of the electricity in Spain that is linked to some bets. So it's not always a peaceful journey. It's not always a pleasure journey, but Europe is leading very strongly this and pushing others. We know that now Joe Biden is joining to this Green Deal, etc. But Europe is betting very strongly. Nacho, do you agree on the view?
Yes. No, fully agree. I mean, I think Europe is leading that, right? And it ties to what I said before, right? Because they have a clear incentive to do that. Other countries, they depend on fossil fuels, so it will not be that easy to drop them. But for Europe, the business case is so clear that yes, they're betting very heavily on it.
A point here that is for me is quite important is where are we betting, and that is a strategy. Europe is betting about to generate the demand. We see North Korea, we see China, we see Japan betting on develop the technology to satisfy this demand. That is something that was analysis that we did something like a year ago. And that was something that I don't like too much, because I would prefer to develop the technology into growth instead of being a technology importer. I know that is maybe an unfair simplification of the European industry that is on the edge in many of the areas, but I think that they could claim a bigger role in developing technology. Today we are looking to generate the demand and to force the demand. I would love to be also somehow developing the leadership in this technology development, not only on the patent, but also on the industrial part.
We have one last question from Adnan Mihiri, asking what would be the guidance for executive teams in oil and gas? You have showed that actions from IOC and NOC vary. If you were to recommend investment in green energies, how much capex is an appropriate response to evolving landscapes?
There is not a single answer, I imagine. It's like, I mean, I'm going to put a very, very simple example. The kind of, what is right for a dog is not right for a dog or for a parrot. So we have many, many players with many, many different strategies, many, many conditionings. So there is not a simple answer, but I think that 10% is not enough. 10% is not enough to ensure the transition. However, there is a bottleneck in this transition. I don't think that most of the oil and gas players will succeed in this transition in order to be profitable as a company in 15 years. That is going to be very stressful for everybody because it's not the natural area. You have to transform yourself, and not everybody succeeds in the transformation. What do you think, Nacho?
Yes, I think in terms of the investments, so let's say the ones that are more advanced, they're betting on power, renewables, because they are already mature and they know that they will get some it's a return on that investment. But if we look for some of the other let's say technologies that where companies are betting on, so those, I mean, you need to balance your capex, right? So on let's say technologies that are mature enough so you are sure that you will get a good return, but as well on technologies that are not yet mature, but they could be a very good business in the future. And because in the end, if you don't invest on new technologies, they will not become mature, right? So you need to get, or to have some risk. You need to take some risk on which technologies and we see very different approaches here. So people, let's say you have people investing on CO2 capture, and some others they will bet on waste, some others they will bet on hydrogen. So who's going to win? I don't know, but what I know is that some will lose, some will win.
Yes, at the end, you have to have an equilibrium in your portfolio. between you have some risks. It's quite similar to the upstream strategy on the exploration and production. You have some more sure and low reward, and you have to have a balanced portfolio in order not to lose opportunities. And that is the big problem here, is that it has even more uncertainty than in the exploration that already has its own uncertainty.
I think it's time to close. I see in the comments. So for me, I just want to, before we close, a big thanks to everyone participating in this webinar, to all the attendees. A special thanks to all the people behind the scene that you don't see, but there you have a lot of people preparing this webinar for you guys. And they've been working a lot to have this presentation running smoothly. So big thanks to everyone behind the scenes, and hope to see you very soon.
Yes, as always in the IFP, things work extremely well, and it seems that nobody's working. And the reality, everybody's working very hard to make things happen, and it's somehow the magic of IFP.
Okay. So thank you very much, Rafael and Ignacio, for accepting our invitation. And many thanks also for your authorization to share your presentation after this session with the attendees. That's true, our webinar is coming to an end, and it's now time to conclude. So Christine, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much to both of you for this very interesting Two Voices talk, and thank you for the nice words you had about IFP School and the big family. This big family, it's a reality, and you gave us an example, and we must capitalize on this reality and on this big family. So of course you're always welcome in your school. Thank you to all of you for the discussion, the questions. Thank you to Rita for the exercise, which is not so easy. Thank you very much. So next webinar will be held on September 16th. It will be given by Caroline Haquet, class 2005. Finally, a woman, and this webinar will be temporary, entitled Modeling and Risk-Taking in the Upstream Oil Industry. So I wish to all of you, nice and safe holidays, and I will be pleased to see you in September.